Welcome to the Cafe Culture podcast, a season of discussions on culture, politics, philosophy and science.
At a talk recorded on the 15th of February 2016, Vera Baird discussed policing the changing nature of crime.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be here. I hope you're clinging wonderfully to your pretty pictures, which will be, I think, my only prop. Let me talk about the role, first of all, in a very straightforward and factual way, because actually, not much loved as a role, a complete kind of bolt from the blue in a constitutional sense when it was set up, about to be re-elected in May. Clearly going to stay because the Conservatives did win and they are committed to the role. And the next election after May is the same day as the 2020 general election. And so even if Labour won and was still, ziffy now, committed to abolition, it couldn't abolish them now and it couldn't abolish them then either. So we certainly have 8 years more of police and crime commissioners to come. So it's good to reflect on what it is doing. So the role is, of course, I'm elected. And I was elected in the dark depths of November in 2012. And what everybody knows about that election is that the turnout was low. And my turnout was 16.2%, so that certainly qualifies as low. However, I don't know that that is the right way to judge the role itself, in that on the same day that all the police and crime commissioners were elected, the MP for Manchester Central, Tony Lloyd, became the Police and Crime Commissioner, vacating his parliamentary seat, which was contested and won by Lucy Powell. So on the same day as I got 16.2%, Lucy Powell was elected to Parliament with 18.2%. So the turnout was very, very similar, and it simply is not a great idea to have an election in the dark depths of November. But it especially isn't a good idea to have an election for something that nobody's got the remotest idea what it is. One of their arguments for this role was that the police authorities who preceded us were known about by only, surveys said, 7% of people. So you were really saying to people, would you like to vote for something that's a little bit like something you've never heard of? So not surprisingly, it wasn't a big rush. However, here we are, and what is the role then? It is to be the people's voice in policing. And as such, I have the police budget. I own all of the police property. Every single police station belongs to me. At least it belongs to the role, and the vehicles and so on. And I can appoint and I can remove the chief constable. And my obligation is to consult the public, which I did immediately after the election in as good a way as I could, produce a police and crime plan, which says what the public's priorities are, hand that to the police and crime plan to the chief constable and say, deliver that. And then step back, because I must be involved in operational policing at all, being a political elected person, step back and with the public say, is he doing it correctly? Is he getting what we want? Is he behaving in the right manner? Did we get the priorities right in the first place? Does he need more officers over here or what? With the public. So that's the central part of the role. And I think you can probably see, even from that sketchy outline, that it is capable of being a significant shift of power from the police, who are a very powerful organisation, to the public through an elected person, if that elected person is diligent and takes the role on strongly. There's more. There's the and crime bit. And that starts kind of on my left here, which is that I have an obligation to work with the community safety partnerships in the local authorities who try to safeguard community safety. So they would have things like youth schemes to try and deflect young people from crime, and so on. I have an obligation to help them. Over here, I have an obligation to work with the criminal justice agencies to make an effective and efficient criminal justice system. So the role is all the way around from trying to stop crime from happening, an obligation to try and do that, all through the middle of running the police, as it were, through its policing, and then into the criminal justice process to follow, all part of my role. And then in addition, last April, police and crime commissioners were given responsibility for not all but most victim services. So we have Victims First Northumbria, as we in effect took it in-house. We work closely with the police when there is a report to the police, though we obviously look after people who've been victims who never go to the police. They come to us through a whole variety of ways. But Victims First Northumbria is intended to work closely with the police so that there isn't too much repetition and too many people involved. If somebody's a victim of crime, the officer will be their foundation, as it were. She will do a needs assessment. That needs assessment will be handed over to Victims First, obviously with the complainant's consent, and that Victims First care coordinator will organise what's needed to help that person cope and recover, which the needs assessment says they want. So of course they will ring within the next day the victim and talk to them and see that the officer's got it right. But the idea is to get rid of what happened lots before, which is you tell the officer what's happened, and then you get a letter about your crime number, and then you get a text from victim support saying, do you want some help? And then you phone up because they don't get many responses to that, and you have to say it all over again. And then if there's a need to specialist, refer, or if you need a volunteer to give you some tea and sympathy, then it goes away again, and you end up with 4 or 5 best friends. And that's before anybody's been charged, because if somebody's charged, then you go into the witness care unit, and that's another needs assessment, and then you go into the hands finally of the court-based witness service at court, who will look after you again. This is too much, and people have said, and we try therefore to streamline that whole process. The officer will do the needs assessment, pass it to Victims First, and that will be it. Victims First will look after the person. If there's a referral on, nonetheless the witness care coordinator will hold on to contact with that person and be the hub. So that was the extra, a very sizable extra responsibility given to police and crime commissioners within that first period, which wasn't there when we took up post in the first place. And to me, that has a good deal of potential, not only for the coping and recovering process for people, but also for advocacy, because still it is my clear view, and we can discuss this later, that victims are not put at the centre of the criminal justice system. And if I have an obligation, the one over on the right, you remember, to make the criminal justice system efficient and effective, and I have all that knowledge about how victims are going to be dealt with by the criminal justice system, because we'll follow them all the way through it and look after them through it, then I'm going to have lots and lots of leverage to try and put them in the middle and to try to improve the criminal justice system as we go on. So in quite short term, that's the role is much bigger than most people think that it is, and it does have a very significant reach. I've got the police budget, which is about that big. I've got a Ministry of Justice budget, which is even smaller, for essentially victims, but also to help all sorts of organisations who can either help crime not to happen or support people when it has. So that's kind of a nutshell of my role. What I want to say, which is about new kinds of crime and new kinds of policing, just as a bit of an outline so we can discuss it more, always has to be pinned, I'm afraid, to the context of funding. We have got used, I think, over the last few years to the government saying crime is going down, and we've cut the police, and we've cut police funding, and because crime is still going down, we can carry on cutting police funding. This is not correct. The crime survey for England and Wales is what the government relies on to say that crime's going down, and it produced an 11% reduction in crime in its results last year. However, it does not count trafficking, sexual offences, homicide, cybercrime, fraud, or forced marriage. It does not count either victimless crimes, as it calls it, like drug taking, and it does not count business crimes, shoplifting, metal theft, because it's about asking families what they've suffered. It actually doesn't count 31% of crime, and there is a cheeky professor somewhere who says it's better at not counting than it is at counting. Now, I've got no criticism of it. It's just been around a long time and it probably needs to change, but that's no basis on which to say that crime is going down. And actually the National Audit Office said that last year crime went up nationwide by 2%. And you will know well from your day-to-day lives that, for instance, things like sexual abuse complaints have gone up very considerably, 60% in 1 year of an increase. Domestic abuse also is going up, and that is largely about confidence, but we can look at those issues later. But crime going down, cut the police, doesn't work. It's not as simple as that. And look, if you will now, at your pretty picture, which is an organogram, I think. What it is a really quite early attempt to see what the demand on policing is, because it isn't just crime. And you've had a few minutes to take a look at it. So a very quick scan, and you can look at it at your leisure as you wish, is that there are, in a typical day, an officer here will take 2 place of safety orders. Sorry, this is the force. We'll deal with 212 antisocial behaviour incidents, which are not crimes. We'll deal with 81 domestic abuse incidents, most of which will not turn into crimes. It will seek out and try to find 21 missing people who will be geared at different levels of risk. It will do 42 stops and searches. And over the right-hand side, because we're only just skimming through it, it will issue 132 charges, 20 cautions, 8 penalty notices for disorder and 2 cannabis warnings. There'll be 523 999 calls and nearly 1,000 non-emergency calls. And the things in the middle are about managing, safeguarding, managing high-risk victims or managing high-risk perpetrators. So actually 22% of the police time is spent on crime, and the demand is quite otherwise. And so that fundamental error that you can keep on pushing the police down because crime is going down, if it were ever right, has not taken account of this reality. And this is still quite embryonic, but the National Audit Office accepts that this is the case. This is Northumbria police who have got this. What the National Audit Office says is neither the police nor the Home Office properly understand the demand on officers, and consequently the Home Office, if it keeps pushing funding down, will not know when it's going to push an individual force over the incline to the end. We have had a very rough time with cuts. We have had the biggest cuts, literally, of any force in the country at all. And again, the National Audit Office says so, and I can tell you why in a couple of minutes. But we have lost something like 108 million. We have a budget of about 270, so we've lost almost a third of it in the last spending round. We have lost 861 police. We have lost 940 staff through those cuts. It would have been significantly more, but we had reserves and we have used them. 71 million was the level of reserves in 2010. 15 million and declining is the level of safety reserves we have now. We have had the worst cuts because we have the lowest precept of any force in the country. the bit of the council tax that pays for police, the police precept, on a Band D property, which is how council tax is generally managed, the sum that produces for me is £88.33. On a Band D, that's what I get per year from a house. In Durham, my colleague gets £162 from a Band D property. My colleague in Cleveland gets £205 on a Band D property. And my colleague in Surrey, where it's pretty wealthy and you'd expect them to have a high precept, gets £220. So if you give me a 2% increase, it's 2% of £80. Next door, it's 2% of £160. And that, in a nutshell, is why we've had the worst cuts, because my funding is made up of a pie like this. And the part of it that's represented by this tiny precept is only like this. And so when the government cuts 25%, as it has, of its grant, it's cutting 25% of all of that. Whereas when your precept is £200, like in Surrey, that slice is much bigger, and so the cuts are over a much smaller part of the police whole funding. And so we have suffered the most of all of them. The Chancellor has said that he has maintained police funding through this spending review. That is not true. What he has done is he's maintained spending for the spending review if and only if the Police and Crime Commissioner in each area increases the precept by the maximum that it's lawful to do so. In most places, that's 1.99%, but in the bottom 10 precepts, and we remember are the very bottom, then we have been allowed, in inverted commas, to add £5 onto that Band D rate. So instead of £88, you have to add on 5 and it will be 93, which is an addition of 10 pence a week or 5 pence a year. But that is what I have to put on, or else we suffer a loss, because that's how he said he's keeping funding level, only if the council tax is brought up to the maximum possible, and for me that's 5%, and the Police and Crime panel who scrutinised me have agreed with that, and so it will be so. So crime is not the whole story about policing. Crime is not going down, but it certainly is changing quite significantly. And the new territory, one of which I just want to highlight in the time that I've got, and then we can discuss lots of the others in discussion. The new territory is essentially about vulnerability and about areas such as child sexual exploitation, domestic and sexual abuse, hate crime, and so on. These are the increasing reports by acres and acres and acres of them. They are increasing over traditional crime. Before I mention the one I want to talk about, let me just say two things. And the first is this, that there's some significant national work going on at the moment between the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, which is the group all 41 of us belong to. There are 13 Labour Police and Crime Commissioners, 16 Tories, and the others are independents. So we work as a group of Labour ones. The Tories do too, but truly it's not a highly politicised role, and we work well across barriers. But the APCC and the National Police Chiefs Council, which is all the chief constable ranks, are working together on what are called specialist services. Firearms, counter-terrorism, regional serious organised crime, dogs, horses, all of those things, every force used to have one of each. Now we have to work out through austerity at what level each of those specialist services could be allocated, and that process is underway. So a lot in the pipeline in that regard. And the other thing that I wanted to say before turning to some stuff about vulnerability, is that the public essentially wants to see police on the beat. And all of the time, that is what people say. They want to see police on the beat. They want to know, if they can, the name of the local bobby or the local CSO. They want to know they're there. They are worried about antisocial behaviour. They are worried about problems in the locality that might get bigger. They're worried about all the stuff you'd expect, like litter and dog fouling. And they value hugely having somebody in the community to whom they can turn. So we have stuck out to protect neighbourhood policing here as best we can, because that's what everyone wants. So we have now got cops in shops, cops in the college on the West End, police in the Sanderson Arcade in Morpeth. We have getting rid of ancient old police stations, with cells underneath that nobody's been able to use since Victorian times, which cost a fortune to maintain. Get rid of those, put them very accessibly locally, and make sure that they're always at the front line. And that's what the public want. However, because there is this change to the nature of crime, we have got to do something to free up resources to deal with vulnerability. That doesn't mean we have to put an end at all to neighbourhood policing, but we do have to start doing some quite interesting but possibly problematic things. So, for instance, there now is just starting something called resolution without deployment in Northumbria Police, which means, for instance, it started in two particular areas of offending. It's if you are a garage owner and you call in because somebody's filled their car up and driven away. Normally, the police would go out and visit the person. It's perfectly clear who the person is because you can see the CCTV and you can recognise the car and you can find the person. Go out and say, you haven't paid, and they invariably will say, "Goshy, officer, I totally forgot." And so they will go and pay, as it were, or else. Well, now we're not going to do that. We're going to phone them up and we're going to say, will you pay? And if they pay, fine. But we are not sending police out to do that. Furthermore, shoplifting, we cannot really attend in every case. Let me make clear, if there's an issue, if there's a vulnerability, or if the person's been caught and they're, in someone's grip and having a fight, the police will come. But if it's the case, as it often is, we've just noticed there were two lads in here half an hour ago and they've taken away 10 tins of salmon and 6 bottles of brown ale. We want to report that this is shoplifting. They are not going to send an officer out to collect the CCTV. They are going to say, email it to us and we'll report the crime. And that is going to be a developing area where we just simply have to try to save officer hours so that they can be deployed, because officer hours add up to officers who can then not be doing this kind of task, but can be helping to deal with the increase of vulnerability, cybercrime, and various other things that are the new staff. And we also will have, although we always have so far gone out to every crime, the police have not always gone immediately out. For instance, again, if your car has been stolen a couple of hours before whilst you were out, then there isn't a load of point the police officer coming to look at the hole where your car used to be. But they will come out ultimately to talk to you and find out, all about its security and who could have taken it and that kind of thing. But normally they'd have just come when they could, and you'd have been hanging about waiting for them to fix into their slot something. Now they will, when you ring and you say, "My car's been stolen 2 hours ago, it's here," they will say, "Well, when would you like to see us? Tomorrow at 3? Fine." And we have officers in diary cars who just go from appointment to appointment to appointment, doing, a bulk number, as it were, of those relatively low-level things to attend to, which nonetheless require reassurance for the public, but can't be given the priority they use to get. So in these ways, we will try to save officer time and put it elsewhere, because assuredly we're not going to be able to recruit very significantly at all. Now, the most central thing in new offending is sexual exploitation. And it is not new offending. As you know, there is a great deal of historic sexual exploitation, but since the Savile case and since the celebrity cases like Rolf Harris and Stuart Hall, people have become more confident that they can talk about what's happened to them, and they have started to come forward in very significant numbers. 57% more people complaining of sexual exploitation in one single year after Savile, and it is not going down, it is carrying on. It is about having confidence in the police to deal with it seriously. It is hugely difficult to talk about. It is very intimate, of course, but it is also incredibly undermining. If somebody has been dealt with like that and the other person has just gone on their way, they are likely to be quite fundamentally upset about it. They are likely to be undermined. They'll be satisfied that it was their fault, that it's their shame, that they encouraged it in some way, that they were compliant, they were a party, and they are not going to come and knock very loudly on the police station door. By and large, we're going to have to go out and find them. And we are going to have to go out and find 2 currently exploited people, because that, I fear, is happening as well. Since the days of Rotherham and the Thames Valley, Oxford and Rochdale, we have known that it is a certainty that everywhere there is sexual exploitation of the vulnerable of this nature. There's a piece of research published here a week ago by Barefoot Research which says it's here too, but we knew that. They identify about 300 young people who they say are being abused currently or have been in the recent past. In Newcastle, what happened was it odd, fortuitous, quite tangential. Somebody came into a police station to complain about being bullied by another young woman. The first complainant was not a very bright person. She told a whole story of the circumstances in which this other young woman had bullied her, and it was clear to the officer that it wasn't about bullying at all, that she was in the middle of a gang of sexual exploitation. And she didn't know it. And that's not unusual. And this kind of gang is about parties and about boyfriends. So somebody will befriend and groom a person. It may be vulnerable because of age, but not always. It's vulnerable in other ways, perhaps being sexually abused before as a child, or perhaps being bereaved, or not having learning difficulties, or almost any kind of vulnerability can make a person quite insecure, easy prey to somebody who flatters them, who's accomplished at it, who tells them they're the greatest thing alive and they can hardly keep their hands off them, and they really are going to be the world's greatest success, and so they should come out with them. And they go to parties where young women are given drugs and drink and have sex with men, and that is a pattern, and that is what this displayed. Now that's kind of happy in a sense for Northumbria Police, because there was no prospect of what you fear from the police still, which I'm afraid that the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police has been displaying just recently, which is total scepticism, a wish to be sceptical about this. Northumbria Police didn't have a person coming to complain to them about sexual exploitation about whom they might be sceptical. They got it completely through that sideways route, and so they were onto it straight away. And what they have to do is they had to find out where it was happening and with whom. And these girls were not going to be able to be hugely helpful, though they were some guide. So there is a 40-officer contingent who've been involved now for the best part of 2 years solidly in this. And there were surveillance techniques, observing, looking at where it's likely things were happening, and then covert resources, literally people pretending to be party men, going in and watching for how it occurred. through all of that covert surveillance and observation, there had to be a marketing campaign. They seem like opposites, but they work together. The entire community had to be approached, to be told how to see the signs and to report anything they worried about. They visited, in this particular part of Newcastle, every hot food takeaway, every shop, every hotel, every nightclub, every bar, and they stopped, they think, every taxi that went through that area to comb for culprits or people who would watch because they lived there. And the upshot of all of that, and a lot of close working with local authorities, social work teams to help when vulnerable people were unearthed, the consequences of that have been a long series of trials at Newcastle Crown Court this summer, which have culminated in some convictions and are likely to be repeated for quite a few months now. The key to it all is that very mixed kind of operation, but it's also partnership working, because some of the young people, it is mostly females, but there are one or two lads, they don't want anything to do with the police. They hate the police. They are very disturbed because they have had, drug abuse. They have had drink abuse. They have been sexually exploited time and again. They have boyfriends who come and go into custody, out of custody, let them down, support them. They often self-medicate on drugs because you would, wouldn't you, in that situation, and that gives the boyfriend even better a grip because he is, of course, the drug dealer, and there have been many convictions for drug dealing and a couple for firearms. That's a very comprehensive operation that had to be started. It is a very good one. I have twice been to Downing Street to present that to the government because it is the state of the art. I tell you, it's very funny going to Downing Street if you're Labour at the moment, but nonetheless, was taken on as a model of its own kind, and that is very, very important. But look, consider, there probably are 200 criminal offences there. Let's go back to crime going up or crime going down. It has taken all of what I've said in 2 years to get about 200 criminal offences, and absolutely imperative that it was done. But compare and contrast 200 criminal damages, 200 street fights, 200 of almost any kind of traditional crime, which can be reported and detected just like that. This is fabulously expensive, very, very painstaking. It needs a supportive, expert kind of officer who is just not readily available. And so we are not talking, when you say, as a Tory Home Secretary, crime is going down, you are not talking about what I'm talking about at all in any way. So there is a real tension, I guess. What the public want is people on the front line. What we need is that, sure, but we also need this expertise. I haven't started, and I'm not going to start, about violence against women and girls, but there is a whole other scale of the same kind of thing here about that. And so, because it's better if we talk, and I don't talk myself much longer, let me just say, those are a few issues that arise, and let me come back to my role in all of that. It is to ensure that the funding's there, it's to ensure it's well organised, it's to ensure that it deals with the public properly and the public are satisfied with it. And where's the future for police and crime commissioners? That's a very interesting question which we could talk about, going beyond what's currently there. 2 weeks ago, following a consultation, the government announced that it favoured, if there was a business case locally, that the fire and rescue service should come into the police and crime commissioner remit to get what they talk about, cut head office costs, cut buildings, share working, and so on, as if they were the same thing. The police and the fire. There may be some sharing of call centres. The call centre for the police would be measured about that big. The call centre for the fire service will be measured about that big, so that is not going to make a great difference. And actually the one that's of concern is the one for the ambulance service, which is about as big as this room. But that is one proposal that should come forward. And then the week after we've been offered the fire service, we were told that they favoured giving us more local control over the criminal justice system. Now, I personally, as a criminal barrister, know more about that than about fire. What do I know about fire? You strike a match and light one. I don't know what else there is to be said. I expect it's a management issue like anywhere else, but criminal justice, that might be more to the point, because we can get the police into a good order. Then there's the CPS, and then there's the court system, and then there's the judiciary, and then there's the defenders, and then there's the sentencing, and then there's probation, and then there's NOMS. And if we could have some local say over all of that, I think the improvements that have come through the police, and they genuinely have. I want to say, before I stop, that our police are very, very good. There will be bad apples, I don't doubt it, but they are public spirited, they are public facing, they are can do, they will give anything a try, and they intend to serve the public well. And so they are a very important part of our society here, and they can do quite a bit, but with more criminal justice leverage, they might be able to do a bit more. And then finally, I don't know if you saw that Theresa May also suggested that possibly police and crime commissioners should open schools, free schools for troubled young people who are going to get in trouble. This has got to be a Michael Govism, in my view, transferred from education. It's kind of odd idea, and I don't relish that one either. But I think police and crime commissioners are here to stay. The whole untapped question of devolution might be interesting to talk about as well. And so over to the questions, and thank you for listening.
Cafe Culture North East is supported by Newcastle University, Peels and Dance City. We're also supported by DC Cafe, who host the events.